All right, we good to go?
Yeah, we got it.
All right. Well, thank you all. I appreciate this. Well, good afternoon. As for whenever people see this later, whatever point in time you see this, hello. I'm Cedric Scott Jr. I am a former chemist, transitioned into education probably about 10 years ago. Went into teaching, worked my way through, I guess, the DC public schools kind of system. My last school based role, I was actually an assistant principal and a math instructional coach. And since then, I've left to do some different things in education. And today, I want to actually focus on how we can leverage and use AI, particularly in a home learning sense. So I'll delve into that a little bit with this presentation. I actually want to start with this is probably my favorite quote from Carter G. Woodson. This is actually taken from The Miseducation of the Negro, talking about true education. And I think, in essence, what we're doing here, Stefan, what you've created with Black AI Think Tank and all the folks on the call, all the presentations that we've seen this week, uh, all lean directly into this, which is really driving forward understanding and building competency and capacity for learning in a lot of different contexts. And I think a lot of people kind of misconstrue certain things. So I'll lead this by saying that school and education are not synonymous. They are, in essence, kind of their own things. You can learn and become educated in a lot of different ways from different people. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a physical building, which I've learned a lot, especially supporting and working with homeschooling families. One of the kind of primary components that I lean into is actually this equation that I came up with. I'm, naturally kind of a math-minded person, I guess you can say. Exposure plus experience equals education. And the way that I break that down is really distinguishing between the two, right? Exposure is essentially just kind of knowing that something exists, maybe seeing it, but not necessarily being engulfed in it. The practicality of actually walking in that thing. Quick and I guess simple example I can always provide for people, which is kind of enlightening for people, but also kind of surprising for a lot of folks. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We didn't necessarily do a lot of traveling growing up, and there weren't any beaches around. So I honestly had not been to a beach until I went to college. I went to Virginia State University, and I have friends from Virginia Beach, and they actually took me to the beach for the first time. I was probably 20 or 21 years old, and from that point, I was able to make the connection to what I'm sharing with you all right now, and kind of what we're seeing with AI, where I saw, a beach on TV, right? I knew it existed. I was exposed, but I never had the experience. So physically going and dipping your toes in the sand in the water is definitely different than seeing it on TV, right? Feeling that breeze. And I think that that's where we are with AI and why it's important, and also why we should lean directly into supporting families from home to be able to leverage these tools and resources so that our children can reap the benefits of it, but also just for the family unit as well. I think that there's a lot of growth potential within the use cases for AI, and definitely, I personally am seeing these things. Being a father, I have a 4-year-old son, and I support a lot of different folks in different co-ops and things like that, where we're beginning to put these things into practice, and it's not necessarily just the theoretical things that kind of seem like they're floating in the air, kind of matrix pie in the sky type of idea. All right, so just a couple of figures. I don't want to get too deep into a lot of the numbers, but this is actually something that really stood out to me a lot, especially during the pandemic, right? Because of course that's when everything was happening as far as 2020 goes. Within the scope of that year, from spring into fall in 2020, with just several months, the homeschool population for Black families grew from 3.3% to just over 16%. The largest growth by any demographic, percentage wise, at that time, and probably still to this point. So the question, we can start to look at and glean from this and say, well, of course, everybody was, learning from home. The pandemic was happening. However, people were learning based either in schools, or even more so in virtual environments. But what we saw was somewhat of like a mass exodus of a lot of families, primarily Black families. At the time, I was still living in the DC area. And they basically, they being parents, families, right, started pulling the kids out of schools, right? They were able to make these things happen from home. And I've noticed through just offering support, resources, information, my own expertise and background, especially in math and science, within a lot of these different virtual communities, right? So different uh, homeschool co-ops. So the main thing that I found was number one, this was already happening, right? Like families were already homeschooling. They were already communing, coming in together in community, working together, educating their children, one hand washing the other type of thing. But with the pandemic happening, I became even more aware of how a lot of the homeschool, particularly the co-ops, functioned, where you basically have a mass of families joining a group. In a lot of contexts, for me, it was Facebook groups during the pandemic time, where I started finding these, families, and it was like, hey, we offer these classes online, and I just jumped in and started teaching math classes within some of the co-ops. And what I also started doing was sharing and teaching the content that I personally was creating, which was focused more so on what we look like, right? Our representation, and creating those things. So within that, we saw not only these numbers growing, but also the capacity within our young people. Because one thing that I noticed in a lot of cases was that many of the children in these homeschool co-ops and groups, or just even through talking to families, doing tutoring, anything like that, many of them were actually far past where they would be technically by grade level standard, right? So you might have a 7-year-old child who, if they were in public school, they'd be in second grade. However, what they were able to do at 7 years old would also kind of rival what I've seen with some fifth, maybe even sixth graders when it comes to math, and other, aspects of learning. So there's really no kind of holding back. Another aspect I want to share too, is kind of this piece here. Just really everything to me points back to information. Information changes situation, as I've heard, and with that, there are some considerations I think that we actually can tie AI into very nicely in this whole type of context and sphere when we're looking at, right. So the first thing is thinking about the knowledge diagnosis, and that's really taking account and thinking about, well, what do we know, right? What information do we have at our disposal? Where are we currently? And in a lot of situations and contexts related to education, or even different organizations, nonprofits, the phrasing there is meeting people where they are, and that's what we see, right? And that's what happens, and that's where I think, especially with families, we can actually take that approach when it comes to implementation for AI with them at home, is meeting them where they are, right? Where do they understand, right? What do we know so far? And getting it to a point where people aren't afraid of this. They don't run away and say, oh, well, this, this technology is crazy. I don't understand it. It's over my head. And it's like, no, when you make it practical and real, it takes that away, right? It removes that stigma. And also, considerations for culture, of course. Like, I know we've had Aaron Riddick, and I'll actually, hopefully get to my point of some demo with Chat Black GPT as well, just showing how some of this stuff can be applied directly. But actually looping in and thinking more so about um, how we show up, and making sure that for our children, how they see themselves and also view the world, right? Which I'll talk a little bit about. And then another component of it is the keys unlock doors, right? We have to actually provide our families, our children, with the tools to be able to move into opportunity. And AI is definitely one of those. So if we're not sharing that information, we're not putting those resources out, then honestly, I would argue that we're kind of more so a part of the problem than we are the solution. And I also give the caveat that while it is important and imperative that we share and provide all of the benefit, we should also give both sides, right? Because you do have the fear mongering people who are saying, AI is crazy, it's going to take over the world and take our jobs and etc. And then you have the other people on the other side saying, oh, we should leverage it. It's great. I'm making millions of dollars, etc. Which is fine. My whole thing is just tell the truth, right? It's fine. Just tell both sides of it and also provide people access, at meaningful points so that they can make those distinctions and decisions for themselves. Because people are intelligent, right? Our families, our children are intelligent people. I don't know if when the last time you all had a conversation with a 4 or 5 year old has been, but if you haven't recently, and you have access to, right, you got a child of your own, a niece, a nephew, grandchild, like go just sit and talk with them, just sit and talk with them. You'll be amazed, right? My son, every day I learn something new, right? And it for me it's an eye-opening experience all the time. And the last thing is of course thinking about our why, right? What's the importance, what's the premise? As an educator, as a father, as a black man at this point in my life, what I've realized is that my why extends far beyond myself, my own family, anybody that I can reach out and have at my kind of right at my side at any point. Um, my why is actually the black child who was born on the day that I die. What did I leave behind for them? Right? What am I putting out right now that will surpass and supersede my life? Right? It's not about me. It's not about us. That's why we're doing this right now. That's why we're recording this, right? That's why people can come back and get it later, because you have to consider a lot of this in saying we're producing things that we will not see the ultimate value from, right? It's almost like artistry. You ask an artist, if nobody ever buys that painting, if nobody ever pays you for that song, would you still create it anyway? For me, the answer is always undoubtedly yes. I'm gonna do it anyway, right? So that's kind of why we're here. And shout outs to you all, Stefan, especially for doing this. And then thinking more so about, I know we talked a little bit in previous sessions I've seen related to jobs and career focus. The phrasing prior to, what I've heard, maybe 2 years ago, and I kind of came up with this idea, was preparing students for jobs that don't exist yet. Pushing back on that notion, that I think that's out the door, right? We are now preparing students to create the jobs that don't exist yet, right? Producing, formulating things, actually building and creating. That's where we are, right? We're not in a situation or a system where we are setting really our children up to move into whatever space similar to what we've seen when we were growing up. And interestingly enough, our children are the ones who are basically leading that charge and saying, no, I will not. I'm going to move in this space in this way. I'm going to make it happen like this, right? So again, follow the children, listen to the kids because they understand, they know, right? Foresight and just I don't know, open mindedness is an amazing thing. But I think that again, leaning back into leveraging AI, preparing our families for this, and just putting them in a position to just explore is level one. And that's where we got to start. All right. So getting a little bit more intentional and really practical about this. I personally subscribe to the notion of mirrors and windows when it comes to education. Yes, it's important for us to know that the world around us exists and that we are global citizens, so on and so forth. The windows, if you will, right? But we need mirrors. And if you're anything like me, I mean, I just turned 34 years old this year. I can recall as an educator in school building, as a student, all those things, that there weren't really mirrors in content and curriculum representation that I could always point to for myself or even for my students, which is why I was like, well, I can't look away. You can't unsee that. And you also can't complain about it if you're not working toward actually providing a solution and producing something. So I didn't mention before, but I'm actually the creator of Melanated Mathematics, which is math and financial literacy content in the context of Black history and culture. And with that, one thing you see on the screen here, and I'm just tying this all together. There's relevance to it, I promise. Um, is one of the STEM career cards that I created using AI. Right, the image is AI generated, and with that, I went ahead and created some little just kind of prompts based on STEM-based careers to propel our students, our children, our families into these spaces, so that they can start to see, right, that these things are possible. I mentioned to you all that I was a chemist at one point. I guess once a chemist, always a chemist. And it was really interesting, but also kind of disheartening at many times where I would tell people, yo, I'm a chemist. And I had people look at me like I had three faces. And and I also had like, family members, they were like, man, I never met a black chemist. And I was like, I guess, I mean, me either until I became one, and the people that I went to school with. But I think we have to move away from those harmful narratives. It's important that we control our story. My favorite African proverb is the tale of the hunt. And the tale of the hunt basically states that, the story will always favor the hunters because you never hear the side from the lions, right? So this is what we're doing by reshaping this, but we got to do it with AI too, right? We have to understand. So, and here's how this all comes together and how we're making it happen in real time. There's actually a quote right here. If you all can see that on the screen toward the bottom, it's kind of cut off, I believe. But basically, it's an excerpt, excuse me, directly from this year's winner of the STEM scholarship that I created in memory of my mom. My mom passed away when I was 10 years old from breast cancer. I created a STEM scholarship to provide resources directly to Black students pursuing STEM degrees. So for the third year in a row, this was awarded. This year's winner is actually a young Black woman, right? High school senior, graduating, planning to pursue computer science. And her purpose is because she wants to combat bias in AI. So I was like, like it just paired too perfectly, not to make that happen. So major shout outs to her for winning that. I can share the link with you all if you are interested in seeing it, but I just thought that was full circle and it just made so much sense. So I wanted to see it reflected here. All right, real quick, if you all would oblige me, if you can type in the chat, or you can come off mute if you want, real quick. Complete this sentence: practice makes.
Perfect.
Is everybody? Let me see. Everybody link it in the chat. Practice. Okay, so practice makes perfect. That's wrong. Respectfully, it's wrong. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. Think about it this way: if I go into the gym, right, a basketball court, and I take the basketball and I throw it as hard as I can at the rim every single day, 100 times. Am I ever going to be perfect at shooting a basket? No, right? But also with that is we have muscle memory, right? Where in many instances, the things that we do become our habits every single day, right? How many people are using AI every single day, right? And reinforcing their skill set, implementing it, and you're getting better at it, right? But with that, your capacity for learning is improving. So practice does not make perfect. It makes permanent. Now here's the caveat. Practicing as perfectly as possible. Notice I said not practicing perfect. Practicing as perfectly as possible, because we're not perfect, will make you as close potentially, right? Hopefully to perfect as possible. So it's all about intentional practice, right? Practice is great if you're doing it the right way. And with that, I also want to just make a quick notion to the image here that theory is great, but practicality, application is actually where everything lives. Let me know if you've ever agreed with the idea that knowledge is power. Anybody agree with that? You can type yes in the chat, no in the chat, or come off mute if you like. Do you agree with knowledge is power? I see somebody say yes, somebody said depends, somebody said 100. Okay, so here's the way that I also frame that. Personally, I don't necessarily believe that knowledge is power. I believe that the application of knowledge is power. I can read 1,000 books, have all the information in my head, and just be walking around just a genius, right? Theoretically, right? But in practice, right, have I actually put that into space and into the world? Have I actually produced anything with that information? If not, then where's the leverage? Where's the power in that? Right? You just walking around smart for no reason, right? Which is part of my issue a lot of times with anybody who's kind of like gatekeeping information or keeping it for themselves. Is we can't be self-serving with this, which is why I'm definitely leaning into in supports of our families, of our youth in particular, around sharing this information, these resources aligned to AI, because we all know on the call, right? Everybody watching this, catching up with this, anybody who's been involved with anything, if you've accessed Chat GPT, you know what the future is starting to look like, right? You have an idea, but I just look at it and say, well, what about this, right, is applicable right now? And where is this going, especially when I consider my son, right? I look my 4-year-old son in the face, I'm like, dude, the world is the world is changing, right? It's different, for sure, in comparison to when I was his age versus now. And I can just imagine in the next 30 years, which is kind of where we're taking things. All right, real quick now. With that, what I want to do also is toggle over, and I want to go into some practical things, because I know that we're probably going to have some families join the call or view the recording after the fact. So the question is always, well, how do I get started? Where do I go? What do I do? And I want you all to just, if you can, make sure or let me know as I toggle this, if you all are seeing the change, because I think I'm just sharing. Let me see. I'm gonna stop sharing for a second and just make sure I got the right tabs, because I'm going to jump around a little bit. Okay, I think I should be sharing. I want to do the whole window versus just the tab. Can everybody see that okay? Is it still just my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm gonna switch real quick. Are you all seeing a switch to a chat bot? Can you see that now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Good. So what I'm going to do here, I already got some prompts queued up just to kind of make this move a little bit more efficiently. But the question is, for families, well, where do we start? What can we do with this thing? Why should I care? So like many people on the call, I'm sure you all have engaged with chatbots. You probably set up your own, created them. I'm going to dig into this probably at I would say 3 different kind of levels, or 3 different facets of application. The first, I'm going to actually just show more of an intentional bot that I created, set up a while ago. I use Poe for this. It's a math bot, as you can see. Hopefully everybody can see it okay. Let me know if you can't. But it's called Math EDU, which is basically just math support. Now, this is kind of how we do like a little bit of an intro. So I know Stefan is always like, well, how would you introduce AI to somebody who's never seen it or never experienced it? And I would, and I have already jump into it very like from an experiential lens, right? Just open it up, show it to them, have them engage. Hey, ask me a question. I went through this with my wife the other day. My wife is also an educator, and she was mapping out a plan, and I was like, tell me what you want, right? And I actually like verbally prompted to get her a plan, right? So uh, here we go. So with Matthew to you, I'm just going to go ahead and add in a prompt. I'll read it out loud, but I'm going to copy and paste just so it's quick. So for this one, it says, show me at least 5 ways to solve 8 times 6 with explanations to support my child's understanding. I don't know if anybody in here is, kind of, I guess, falling victim to the quote unquote new math. But this is one way that you could start to kind of dig in a little bit and begin to get some understanding. Because I know, for many of us being in school, we saw it. You do it this way. That's how it is. It's done. Go past it. Now it's we cut it and slice it 8 different ways to solve the same problem. But this is a way that you can engage. So really quick run through sharing that prompt. Right, 5 different ways to solve the same problem. So you can engage here. All right, so yeah, I see somebody says new math sucks. Sorry, I mean it is what it is. We are what we are. But this is always also to say with application of not just math, but even with AI, that there's points of refinement and sharpening your sword, right, and making your skill set better. As anybody who has engaged with any of these tools knows and understands at this point, the more that you engage with it, right, the better you get, right? The better your prompts get. It's the whole idea, again, going back to practice makes permanent, right? And whatever you do, over and over again becomes your habit, right? And if you have solid habits that are more favorable, then of course you're going to get favorable outputs, which is the same thing with AI prompting, right? You put in, we always say garbage in, garbage out, right? You go with good solid things that you that are you trying to see in terms of output, and you get what you're looking for, right? I'm going to toggle over one more time. I'm going to go a little bit further now.
I have
So
a
that was,
question.
oh, please go ahead.
I was wondering who in academia sets these standards for like new math? Who is this? Is it the educational board of, so and so? Like, does it come from the government? Like, where does this come from?
Well, it's really interesting because if you look at states typically have the choice of setting their standards. That's why I like at this point right now, the last time I checked, it was like 13 and declining the number of states that were still subscribed to Common Core state standards. But typically, you'll see that states will have their own state standard. That's why I like the standardized tests at the end of the year are not all the same, right? If you go to Maryland versus Virginia, 2 different tests, right? Doesn't matter what grade level it is. But a lot of that does trickle down. There is a trickle down effect, from more of like government agencies and things like that. So, but again, there is some choice, but there's less and less choice, honestly, the closer you get to the school level. So so everybody knows, if your kids are in school, cut your teacher some slack. More than likely, they didn't choose the curriculum or set those standards, just as a heads up. And nobody actually goes and talks to the curriculum companies either about what they're producing and why they're putting it out in a certain way. So that's just a thought for people. But yeah, the teachers get a lot of the brunt. But and I see Kelly, you had a question?
Yes. Hello. How are you, Cedric? And thank you for this class. I did homeschool my son for 5 years, and I thought COVID, as like former teacher, was awesome for me because you have that guilt feeling where like if your child is not getting it, and then you're helping all these other kids as a teacher, you're like, oh my gosh. So COVID for me was great. I was able to homeschool him up until the 7th grade when he wanted to be, with other kids. But with the opportunity, with the math part, a lot of times they say that our Black boys and Black girls struggle, especially the boys. And that's the statistic out. And I learned from using other courses from other countries, like U lessons from Africa. I subscribe to different ones where they made the math easy, like we even easier than we learned it. And I think the awesome thing, and hopefully with AI and these different technologies, is like the 3-digit multiplication. It's such an easy way to do that. And even though when the kids get the right answer, I think sometimes in public school, they're like, oh, no, you can't do that. Now, once you get to college, you can figure it out however you figure it out. And that is the interesting thing. It's like we have to teach our kids to relearn as they're going along. And math, the history of math, especially in the United States, has always been different. Like everybody watched a movie with the NASA movie where she created the formula. Nobody knew how to create that formula until she created it. They used the math, but she she made the formula a different way that nobody could figure it out. So this system of all of these new ways, every time a child gets to, every 10 years, they change the math system. And I think it's so we don't, or we can't have access to help our children succeed, especially our Black, boys. Anyway, that's just my opinion.
No, it's an interesting point, and I appreciate you mentioning that. Definitely, as far as our students go, and really thinking about our young men in particular. I'm not sure if you're all familiar. I'll share real quick another caveat about somebody else that you can look into education-wise. Is a gentleman by the name of Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu, and he wrote the book series "Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys," which also speaks to over-identification, over-medication, and when it comes to special education for young Black and brown males in particular. And we do see a lot of those issues and concerns. But with that, I look at it from the lens of, well, what can I control? What can I do? Because here's another sobering statistic that I came across. Less than 2% of all teachers in the United States are Black men. And for me, being a teacher and then leaving teaching, I was like, that was rough, right? You feel the guilt factor of it. But for us, there's definitely a consideration now, especially with leveraging AI and what we mentioned before with the growth in the homeschool sector within our community, and even for those who aren't homeschooling formally, right? If your child goes to school and they come home, I do still believe that we still have the onus and the accountability to still instill certain things, and we can begin to consider in this situation because there might be some excuses, or one of the things I've heard, especially with math, is, and please, if you're an adult on this call and you're around children, you teach children, you work with youth, please don't ever say something like this out loud. Please, just me being like in the space. I'm not a math person. Please don't say that. If you got to say that, go to the bathroom and say it to yourself, or just say it in your head. Please don't say it out loud, because those mentalities, that mindset, it does have a trickle effect. And I have actually had students that I've supported with math intervention who have told me, well, my dad said he's not good at math. My mom said that she's not good at math. So it must be, it trickles down, right? It's almost like being bad at math is hereditary. Dangerous. It's dangerous stuff. So keeping that in mind, though, again, it's all about opening things up, exploration, right? That equation that I gave you all in the beginning, right? Exposure plus experience equals education, right? Exposure plus experience equals education. If you take a young child right now and just let them tinker with things, right? My son, he's exploring, right? He's 4 years old. He's getting into stuff. That's how they learn, right? And then they gain that experience, through that navigation, sometimes through playing. A lot of kids are doing like Roblox and that type of stuff. So they're exposed, and they're already kind of engulfed in some of this world that we're sharing. Honestly, for me, it's more so, how do we make sure that the parents, the families, the guardians, the adults are equipped to at least have a little bit of know-how in navigation, which is why I wanted to do this session. But real quick, I do want to jump in and show a couple more things. So this is, Chat GPT, 4.0. So I can close that sidebar right real quick for y'all. And one of the other conversations around our community in particular is thinking about literacy, right? Especially, again, Black boys fall into this whole stigma and concern around literacy rates. So what I thought was, well, why not take the idea of, okay, play, right, and engaging learning, and also the creative aspects that children naturally have, and apply it here. So one idea, and I want to encourage this for everybody, because as an educator, when I did professional learning, the one thing I always had the intention of doing was I wanted anybody in the space that I spoke with to be able to take one thing away and apply it the very next day, right? So here might be the practical thing for you. If you got a young child, right, let's say 4 years old, you can create stories, right? Getting them to think critically and imaginatively, and then going into focusing and supporting the reading, right? Producing the thing that they will read, I think is extremely empowering. So I'm going to use real quick again, I got another prompt that I'm going to copy and paste over here in the interest of time. And I'll read it really quick. It says, I'm a parent who is working with my 4-year-old child to create a story to encourage a love of literature. Guide us step by step with one question at a time based on the main elements of a story for learning reinforcement. I shortened this from earlier today, actually. Before it said 10 questions, I broke it down. I said, only ask us 5 questions, then create our story. I don't know about you all, but my son, he don't have time for 10 questions. So 5 questions, get in, get out. Then we can read the story after the fact. But let's see what we get. All right, so we are starting to create our story. This worked out better for me earlier. Of course, practicality is a whole thing. Ask one by one. So you'll see me doing some, refining it in real time. All right, so here's my first question. Who's the main character? The main character is Stefan. All right, where does the story take place? Somebody give me a place in the chat, or you can just shout it out real quick. Let's do some engagement with this.
Africa.
Africa. All right, what is Stefan trying to do? Anybody else?
He's trying to find his dad's lost watch.
All right, trying to find it. And I'm going to type this exactly as you all said. His dad's lost watch.
Stefan said, make that bag.
All right. And what's the obstacle? What's the problem that he faces?
Lions, tigers, and bears. Oh, sorry.
Oh my. Right. It should be our last question based on the prompt. And what was the resolve? How did he overcome the obstacles?
He learned how to get along with him.
Let's see, lions, tigers, and bears, just to be specific. All right. At this point, should give me a story. Now, imagine this, right? You're sitting with a child, my son's age, 4 or 5 years old. You create this story, read this story. Now this becomes a bedtime story, right? At this point right now, my son is into sing me a song. My song is ABCs, even though he's 4. Like he's still like, he knows it. And he's like, dude, just sing the song anyway. But we also go into reading between my wife and I, like, he has his books and things like that. But imagine being able to produce, right, literature. And even furthermore, like, consider infusing your child, your grandchild, your nephew, niece, cousin, their name, right, their story into this and creating it. And then here's the next thing. Of course, what we got to do And this is why I'm going to go to my last part real quick. Create a cover image for story. Right. Then we want to leverage the image creation, but I'm willing to bet that this image is not necessarily going to produce a culturally relevant, unless we tell it to in most cases, right? Right, representation. So that's fine, right? That works. However, you know what I mean? There you go. But here's real quick, because we only got a few minutes. So jumping over, shout outs to Erin Riddick and her team over at Chat Black GPT. I wanted to jump in and go even further with this. And I've tested this a couple different ways, but I'm gonna just, in the interest of time, leave in the cultural relevance and Black historical component. But I have gone in and created this same type of prompt that I'm about to show you all, without necessarily having to say Black focused. Okay, it's come back from Chat Black GPT with a Black historical emphasis, or at least representation, infusing it without me necessarily having to say that. But with this situation, I will go ahead and make sure I add that. It's summertime right now, right? Kids are home, they're out of school. Really quick, I'm gonna drop, I got this one here. I got a few different prompts, but I'm gonna try to make this quick because I know we need to end. Stefan, we're still closing out at 5, right? Oh, I'll keep going. Hopefully you heard me. So this one, if we're thinking about broader scope, all the stuff I shared before, representation, relevance, making sure that our children's interests, if you want your kid to learn, infuse and include their interests, right? If it's not anything aligned to what they care about, they won't really dig into the learning, right? So infuse those things here, right? And then include what you think is important, right? What you know is important, the cultural relevance, history. So I said, I want to create an individualized learning pathway for the summer for my child who is 8 years old and has an interest in all things engineering. But I want that plan to be focused and supported by Black historical context. Can you help me create that plan? And immediately it goes into a weekly breakdown. Another recommendation that I would provide, just even based off of this, right? After you go through, review it, right? Don't just take whatever it spits out. Actually go through, see what it's saying, look into some of the resources and things like that. But I would also go in and go as far as to say, now provide, and maybe I'll do it real quick. Give me lesson plans for this as well. And one of the other additions that I've shared with a lot of families is, in another prompt, same thing. You can also add, I want this to be things that I can do from home for little or no money, right? If you want to just make it clean cut, straightforward household materials, you can do that as well, right? Last thing, provide lesson plans for each week. I'm going to say each week. All right, now this is where I'm going to end up closing out because I know we're at time. But hopefully this is helpful, and I can share any additional resources with folks. But again, appreciate the time. Stefan, thank you for organizing this, the entire team. I appreciate you all dearly. Thank you so much for what you're doing, because you all are helping make the world in our space better, not only for me, but also for my son. So thank you all.
Thank you, Cedric. We really appreciate this. This was a wonderful presentation. And I know you've been at some of the other sessions and the themes have been consistent, and we just appreciate you. So it's time for us to move on to the next session. I'm not sure where Stefan is right now, but if you all will go ahead and okay,
I'm here.
well, are we ready to go, Stefan?
Yeah, so we should definitely shut this one down first. Cedric,
Yes.
that was great. I'm going to
Thank
shut this down, make sure everything's off before we open the other one.
Okay, so just give us a few minutes, you all.
Okay.
Thanks, Cedric. This was great.
It was wonderful.
Cedric got his hustle on, his edu hustle. I see.
Great name.
Stop the recording. stop the recording. We're gonna wait.
You know you did that. Oh,
Mhm.
sorry. I had to wait.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I do something?
No, I
No.
just had to give him his kudos after you.
Okay. Y'all got it.
I
All right,
appreciate it.
y'all.
Thank you.
I need to stop the room. So the room will end in 5,
Yes.
4,
Y'all later.
2,